Hello there, I'm Femi OK and you're in the stream. Now today, big oil and big profits from Canada's tar sands. Is it an economic goldmine or an environmental disaster? Our digital producer Malika Bilal is here looking out for your live feedback, and the debate has already started online about the language we're using for this discussion.
Exactly. Some people are taking issue with the term tar sands. They say it gives a negative connotation to a community that some say has really benefited from what's going on. Sarah on Facebook says, there is no tar in tar sands. That's a biased term used by environmentalists to paint imagery of something especially negative. The preferred term is oil sands. Now, some in our community, of course, disagree with that, and they say that the risks are bigger than the benefits. And we want to hear all of those points of view on today's show. So tweet us your thoughts with hashtag AJStream.
Now, an underground oil spill in Canada has been saturating forest land for more than 2 months. Canadian Natural Resources Limited, that's the company which runs the site in Cold Lake, Alberta, has apologised and cleanup is underway. So far, 1 million litres of oily emulsion have seeped into the forest. An anonymous government scientist who spoke to the Toronto Star said nobody really understands how to stop it from leaking, or if they do, they haven't put the measures in place. The tar sands have been highly profitable and a good source of jobs, but the oil spill at Cold Lake is just one of many environmental incidents that have been recorded during Alberta's long history with the oil industry. So today we're looking at what's the environmental and health cost to the people who live there. Joining us to discuss these issues, we have Clayton Thomas Muller, co-director of the Indigenous Tar Sands Campaign. He's in Ottawa, Canada. And via Skype in Calgary, we have Chris Severson Baker of the Pembina Institute. That's a Canadian environmental think tank. And also in Calgary, we have Dinara Millington. She studies the benefits of the tar sands for the Canadian Energy Research Institute. It's great to have all of you in the stream. I'm going to start with a picture I have on my laptop, which is showing me the oil spillage or the leakage that's happening around Cold Lake right now in Alberta. Clayton, what do you know about that oil spill, the very latest? Have you been able to see it or got latest news from there?
Well, first of all, the CNRL, the company that's responsible for this incident, as well as the regulatory bodies in Alberta, have been very secretive about the incident that's going on. There's been a lockout in terms of, civil society and the local First Nation whose traditional lands CNLR is operating on, Beaver Lake Cree Nation, have all been kept away from the site. Information coming out has been available through a variety of investigative methodologies and just drawing from the network of people patching together.
So Clayton, what are you being told has actually happened? How do we get to an oil spillage that looks like this, which is basically black sludge everywhere? What happened?
What we've been told is happening is that CNRL and the regulatory bodies in Alberta don't know what's happening. They don't have an explanation for the failure of the technology, the extractive industries technology that they're using, that there is literally bitumen, the tar sands that is oozing out of the earth. It's continuing to ooze out of the earth. And they basically don't know when that is going to stop. And of course, this is a direct result of some kind of geological failure in the 4 wells that have blown out, and they have injected mass amounts of pressure into this deposit deep in the earth underneath the forest in that region, and they don't know how long it's going to take for that pressure to alleviate itself. And in the meantime, toxic oil is spewing into the forest, killing animals and destroying the environment and contaminating local water supplies.
So Clayton, I have a confession to make, and to Malika as well. I made myself a homemade glossary because I knew there were certain phrases that were going to come up in this conversation that I wanted everybody who's watching to understand as well. So one of them was bitumen. So let's get Dinara to explain what bitumen is as I actually show you some pictures of bitumen. Dinara?
Yeah, absolutely. So bitumen would be a molecule that contains crude oil within the sand and the rock surrounding it, from which you have to extract the actual oil. Way to go, Sarah. I do agree that it's not tar sands, it is oil sands. There is no tar in tar sands. It is oil that just needs a little bit more processing to be captured and extracted.
Okay. All right, Malika.
But, you know, you asked at the top of the show, Femi, what is like there? Well, we heard from two filmmakers who are doing a documentary about that issue, and they sent us a video comment. I want all of our guests to have a listen to this.
Who benefits from the tar sands? Everybody, because Alberta is now a hot travel destination. You see, the oil companies are inviting people to come visit the Alberta tar sands and see it for themselves. Great idea.
The tailing ponds are being cleaned up. You'll be able to drink from them. You're going to be able to fish from them.
Which is awesome because they have huge tailing ponds that you can see from outer space. So don't think game over for the climate. Think game on for awesome fishing. So come to Alberta and remember to breathe. Seriously, it smells terrible, so don't inhale.
So Chris, in that video comment, we heard the documentarian say that Albertan officials are touting this as a destination site. What's really going on, and is it supposed to be that?
So Canada has started to earn a reputation of having trouble managing a world-class resource, a world-scale resource, because we've made some international commitments to address climate change, but we don't have policies that actually require oil sands producers to maintain or reduce greenhouse gas emissions. And we've got very vast areas that are now inundated with tailings as a result of the mining techniques. Over 176 square kilometers of tailings ponds, and they're growing on a daily basis. We have only reclaimed a very small fraction of 1% of the landscape, even though oil sands mining has been going on since the late 60s. And so there's a lot of evidence to point to the fact that Alberta and Canada doesn't have a regulatory regime that's up to the task of really regulating this industry. And so there's starting to become more and more international pressure as a result of that. And I think that pressure is only going to increase the longer that some of those big gaps remain, and climate change is the biggest one. And the CNRL incident is the latest issue to grab headlines internationally. And in this instance, it's pointing to the fact that while CNRL believes that it's a well integrity issue, they're in direct disagreement with what the regulators found back in 2009 when there was another incident at that same site where they found that it wasn't a well integrity issue. It wasn't a problem with the mechanics of what they were doing, but rather they believe it was a problem with the weakness in the formation combined with very high pressure designed to actually fracture the bitumen formation. And so it's going to take some time before we really know what happened there.
I totally feel like I'm doing show and tell today, because what Chris was talking about, I actually have back here on my computer. So this is from the Alberta government, and they were trying to explain wait for this. This is cyclic steam stimulation. This is the process that's being used out at Cold Lake, and this is how it happens. Have a look at this.
This in situ oil sands operation in Alberta's Cold Lake region is using a process called CSS. Cyclic steam stimulation. CSS injects steam down the well at high pressure and temperature. After a soak phase, the well begins to produce a mixture of bitumen, water, and gases that are piped to a central plant for processing.
So, put like that, very simple, easy to follow. Dinara, when I look on Twitter, I see hashtag tar sands, and there is so much animosity. Can you explain to our audience around the world what maybe some of the misconceptions are? What are people maybe not understanding about the process?
Well, I believe that the biggest misconception when it comes to the oil sands is that it's regarded the dirtiest crude oil in the world. If you go with the latest research from IHS, Sarah, and Jacobs Consulting, it is shown the analysis is there that it is not one of the dirtiest oils in the world. It's in the range of with other heavy crude slates such as the Venezuelan crude oil. And then here more, domestically within North America would be the California heavy crude production. When you compare the life cycle emissions coming from the extracting the barrel of bitumen, it's on par with other heavy crude slates. I would say that would be the biggest misconception, and I think that's where the negativity would stem from, referring to oil sands as tar sands and such.
Clayton?
If I could, is it possible to jump in on that?
Yeah, always, go ahead.
So I think, what the world is starting to run out of what we consider to be conventional oil, the oil that flows to the surface, either under its own pressure or with a pump jack going up and down, applying some pressure to it. And we're starting to see companies investing in heavy oil or bitumen, or they're using hydraulic fracturing techniques, which are much more energy and water intensive techniques to get at the remaining pockets of oil. And this is all taking the world in a direction of much more energy is required to extract a barrel of oil. More energy is required to convert that substance into something that can actually be put into a conventional refinery. And so the environmental impact per unit, the environmental impact per kilometer driven is going up as a result. And Alberta's oil sands are a very large development like that is a much more high impact source of oil. And therefore it brings with it a whole host of consequences that didn't exist with conventional oil.
Do you know what I'm not hearing?
Let's be real about this. There is a very real human rights dimension when we're talking about the world's dirtiest source of fossil fuel, Canada's tar sands. As my colleague from Pembina Institute is describing, yes, we are moving towards an era of extreme energy where, we are engaging in a form of energy cannibalism and burning good sources of energy to extract energy at a much more disproportionate rate than what our returns are historically with sweet light crude that he's describing. But when we talk about what's happening in Alberta and the full life cycle of this bitumen, it shouldn't even really be called oil. It's an entirely different classification of fossil fuel unto itself. Comparable to, say, for those that know about the coal industry, it's like lignite coal, which is 10% coal mixed with dirt. This is 10% tarry oil substance mixed with sand and clay, and they're burning massive amounts of energy and utilizing massive amounts of fresh water to extract this stuff out from deep underneath the traditional territory of Cree and Dene people's lands. And while they're going through this process, the massive regional contamination of water, of earth, of traditional food sources. There's no grocery stores in northern Alberta's indigenous communities. People still subsidize their diets off of hunting and fishing. And the contamination that is occurring is bioaccumulating up the food chain and ending up in the food source of communities who depend on that for their livelihood. And the direct result is a spike, a cancer cluster, if you will, that is occurring in native communities just downstream from the tar sands. And in Cold Lake region, this is the traditional territory of Beaver Lake Cree, who are very concerned about their right to hunt, fish, and trap in their territory. And these rights that I'm talking about, these access to food rights, are constitutionally enshrined in Canada's constitution. And they're being violated by big oil. They're being violated by the government of Canada.
And Dinar, many of the things that Clayton just mentioned are things that our community has picked up on. I want you to have a listen to some of these tweets. Sana Saeed says, I live in an oil sands town. The mining has a detrimental effect on health up here. Yes, job creation, but at the cost of life. Another person tweets in saying something similar. Ahoto says the environmental hazards we're exposed to far outweigh the benefits communities get, if any. And one more. Oil companies have been too unconcerned about the environment around which they drill. Unfortunately, this is a global mishap. So how are these concerns, environmental and health concerns, being addressed?
I agree with Chris and Clayton in terms of the extraction of oil sands bitumen would cause an effect on neighboring communities. Absolutely. I think when it comes to the regulation of the industry, I think this is where the Alberta regulator and the provincial and federal governments need to step in. I think the oil sands industry been a scapegoat a little bit when it comes to being blamed for every misfortune and all the emissions that are coming of Alberta. It is not true. So on the regulation part, I absolutely agree. There needs to be more oversight, and the regulations and policies that are put in place by the Alberta Energy Regulator need to be followed and need to be addressed, such as one of them would be Directive 74, which deals with tailings ponds, on which all the companies have missed their deadlines to reduce the tailings and come up with technology to consolidate the tailings ponds. So I agree on the regulation part, but on when it comes to the industry, I think industry is doing it's doing what any other industry would be doing. So to use them as a scapegoat for other issues that are arising out of that, then it's not really fair.
So everybody in Alberta knows what tailing ponds are. For the rest of us?
So for tailings, tailings are created in a mining project when you extract the bitumen that is embedded in the sand with silt and clay. It's like trying to go in and clean up a sandbox that somebody has decided to dump a bunch of heavy oil and tar into. It's very difficult, as you can imagine.
But the bitumen is already there.
So first of all, what you have to do is you have to use a lot of water. You used to have agitation. You have to move that material by a very large truck to a machine that can create these conditions that will actually separate the bitumen from the sands, the silt, and the clay. So you end up using 2 to 4 barrels of fresh water for every barrel of oil that you end up with at the end of the day. And in the process of doing that, you end up with sand, which can be taken away and put back in the mine pit. You end up with silt, which is a bit harder to handle. And then you end up with this liquid that is contaminated, if you like, with very small particles of clay as well as residual bitumen. And that stuff just will not settle out. And so companies have accumulated, as I mentioned before, over 176 square kilometers of these tailings ponds. There really is no proven method to properly reclaim them. There's some schemes that are being proposed where you would just cap it with fresh water. But they represent a long-term liability to Albertans.
Chris, did you hear Dinara just pipe up? She said that the bitumen is already there, Dinara?
Sorry, can you repeat that again?
Yeah, I was just repeating what you said. You said the bitumen is already there.
Yeah, well, when it comes to the open pit mining, the bitumen is already together with the sand, and what mining is doing is they're shoveling the sand and they're separating the oil from the sand. And like Clayton mentioned, it creates large tailings ponds because you have to basically wash the sand and separate it away. So
okay,
what you
so we
have
got that. So we got that picture. I think we can actually now do a little information video about what a tailings pond happen to be. Let's go back to the community and see what they're interested in talking about next.
Right. Well, Dinara mentioned something interesting. You said that the community, the tar sands community, the oil sands, community is being used as a scapegoat. And there is a Facebook comment here from Corey who says, this industry does provide hundreds of thousands of jobs. Without the oil sands, the Alberta economy would crumble. And he says Canada's would as well. And these aren't just any jobs. These are very high paying jobs. But Clayton, on the other hand, there's a video comment here. Have a listen to this.
I think the fact that we've destroyed a size of northern Alberta, basically the size of Florida, to extract really heavy bitumen oil sands from the earth using 5 barrels of fresh water to create 1 barrel of oil really actually means that nobody is benefiting from the tar sands. Future generations certainly won't be benefiting, the ecosystem won't be benefiting, and short-term economic gains don't mean long-term benefits.
So Clayton, I'd venture to say that you agree with that the long-term benefits don't outweigh the jobs?
Well, we have to understand that, first of all, an area the size of Florida is on the table to be destroyed. When we look at the tar sands, I think it's less than 3% of the recoverable resource has already been extracted, but there is a tremendous amount more yet to be extracted. And the reality of it is the tailings ponds, leach 11 million liters per day into the Athabasca River and into the surrounding groundwater resources. And yes, the bitumen is in the ground, and there is some natural seepage into local water resources, right onto the surface of the earth there in the region. But the fact of the matter is that the toxic soup that these 176 square kilometers of tailings ponds that you can see from outer space, these are concentrations of naphthic acids, polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons in 21 varieties, mercury, arsenic, and other heavy metals. And all of this is concentrated into these ponds, which is not a naturally occurring thing for bitumen in its natural state. And this concentrated toxic soup is leaching into critical water resources that not only First Nations, but the agricultural sector, municipalities, all the way to the Arctic Ocean, since the Athabasca River flows north into the Mackenzie River. Dozens of local communities downstream bear the brunt of this totally unsustainable and scandalous form of storing this toxic substance. And the other fact that people need to consider about the mining issue and how that relates to this current Cold Lake well blowout that we're talking about on today's show is that the technology is different for in situ. This injecting steam underground deep into the earth, into bitumen deposits. This is creating tailings ponds that are immeasurable underneath the earth. They have not done the hydrological or geological studies to understand how these wells could blow out, let alone how to stop these toxic tailings ponds that are underground from these in situ, in place steam extraction processes. And for the Alberta Energy Regulatory Board and for industry and the government of Canada and Alberta to go ahead and rubber stamp this form of development without understanding the science behind it is a totally irrational decision to make and very risky, not just to local communities, but to shareholders and to the rest of the Canadian economy.
Right, so Clayton, I hear where you're coming from. Chris, I hear where you're coming from. Dinar, I just want to understand, if you lived around that area, would you feel very comfortable about living there and safe?
Yes, I do.
Because?
And I have my family who lives there with me. Not to minimize the tailings ponds and the impact that it's having on the Athabasca River and the surrounding area. But if we were to compare the oil sands industry to agriculture, the ratio that was given just on the segment there, five barrels of water for each barrel of oil extracted, while agriculture uses probably a lot more water.
Okay, Dinara, we're going to leave it there. Take a pause, Dinara.
Okay,
very good. Take a pause there. We're almost at the end of the program. This conversation will continue online on our post show at stream.aljazeera.com. But before we get there, here's Malika with some other stories that we're following.
Our most requested story online today is the ongoing crackdown on Muslim Brotherhood supporters in Egypt. On the sidelines of the besieged sit-in, social media users shared gruesome images from hospitals around Cairo's Rabat Square, seen here. Independent journalist Sharif Kudus posted this YouTube video showing the scene at Rabat Medical Center, where wounded protesters were treated. Elsewhere in Rabat, a makeshift field hospital set up a live stream, which I'm playing on my computer now, to show the extent of injuries sustained when security forces pushed out supporters of deposed President Mohamed Morsi. The field hospital's Twitter account, Rabat Hospital, sent out calls for surgeons and posted photos on Facebook showing casualties lining the halls. Al Jazeera's Dee Parvez tweeted photos from yet another makeshift hospital inside a nearby mosque. Now, as updates poured out of Cairo's hospitals, netizens amplified the news. Hashtag Rabat trended globally as residents shared reports from the streets. Web users retweeted this message from Alex Ortiz more than 250 times. We saw a bloodbath inside the Rabat Field Hospital. Every floor has a constant stream of dead and wounded, nearly all from gunshot wounds. But for more on the situation in Egypt, head to Al Jazeera's website, where you'll find a map of key locations for pro-Morsi protesters in Cairo, and our live blog with the latest from our correspondents on the ground. And as always, your story ideas could end up on tomorrow's leads. Tweet us your pitch with hashtag AJStream. Femi?
Thanks, Malika. You know, we started the show with a quote from an anonymous government scientist who leaked about the oil leak that's around about Cold Lake in Alberta. And the quote says nobody really understands how to stop it from leaking, or if they do, they haven't put the measures in place. But we left out the beginning, which says everybody's freaking out about this. We will explore that concept in the post show at stream.aljazeera.com. I just have time, though, to tell you about Thursday's program. Would you pay somebody to have your baby? Commercial surrogacy is a booming business in countries like India and Thailand, but some are calling it exploitation. We look at the controversy surrounding this type of surrogacy. I think it's going to be an interesting conversation. Tune in tomorrow and find out. Stay with us. The post show is next at stream.aljazeera.com. Thanks for watching. Hello again, this is the post show at stream.aljazeera.com. You know that because you're already there. We've been talking about Canada's tar sands or oil sands development and what effects the industry has had in the province of Alberta. Joining us today, Clayton Thomas Muller, an anti-tar sands campaign organiser, Chris Stevenson-Baker of the Pembina Institute, Dinara Millington of the Canadian Energy Research Institute. I want to get right back to the conversation. I want to talk about legal repercussions and regulations with you, Clayton. I know that the Beaver Lake Cree Nation actually won an appeal in court. Can you explain what happened and what this meant for the community?
Absolutely. The Beaver Lake Cree Nation is a trailblazer when it comes to confronting the Canadian tar sands industry and their illegal operations in traditional Cree and Dene territory there in northern Alberta. They have launched a constitutional treaty rights challenge, the first of its kind. That is a game-changing lawsuit against big oil, against the Canadian government. And what they are claiming, and what is actually very accurate, is that the Canadian government, the province of Alberta, and big oil are operating their leases illegally and in violation of Canadian law and existing nation-to-nation treaties that have been negotiated over 100 years ago, but that are legally binding, that guarantee the Beaver Lake Cree the right to hunt, fish, and trap without interruption in their traditional territory to feed themselves, to drink the water and all of those things that you need to live a life, a livelihood. The fact of the matter is that their court case has over 20,000 treaty rights violations by big oil in the tar sands by the Alberta and Canadian government.
How do you get 20,000 violations?
Well, that is the incredible amount of leases that are being illegally given to, just about every big oil company on the planet is operating in northern Alberta. This is Texas North, if you will, where, government of Alberta is not adhering to the jurisdiction, the priority collective rights of First Nations in the Athabasca region, in the Cold Lake region, like Beaver Lake. They are not following the federal law where they have an obligation to consult and accommodate First Nations peoples on matters that impact their traditional or treaty lands. This is law in this country. There's over 170 Supreme Court victories in the highest courts of Canada that have reinforced these laws. We have Constitution, the Section 23 of the Canadian Constitution, that also reinforces this legal regime, this First Nations rights legal regime. And the fact of the matter is that when the Beaver Lake Cree win their case, it will set an incredible precedence in our British common law system that we use here, which is based on precedents, that will send shockwaves through the tar sands sector, and shockwaves really, I think, around the world when we think about the geopolitical significance of Canadian tar sands, especially for America and China and other major markets that they're trying to get this landlocked oil to.
Femi, you mentioned the First Nations case. What some of our community members have noted is that oil companies have funded various social projects for First Nations people in Alberta, but Sir Childs on Twitter says, that's true. However, the environmental damage they cause cancels out all such gains. Now, another thing we're seeing are some Facebook groups that are popping up in support of the First Nations people in Alberta. This one is a walk, August 16 through 19. Join us as we walk to heal the land scarred by Utah tar sands. This one's taking place in Utah, but it says in solidarity with the tar sands healing walk in Alberta, Canada. But I want to go back to Dinara, because on the back of this, what you were saying as we ended the main portion of our show today was that you feel completely safe living downstream from the site with you and your family. Why is that?
Because I guess maybe I'm not as a skeptic as Clayton is, but I believe that our government, provincial government, and Alberta Energy Regulator are doing their best to protect the public against the harmful. Excuse me.
Are you eating moose, deer, fish from the Athabasca River on a daily basis? Would you feed the moose, caribou, beaver, and other foods that native people are eating to your children from around these regions? Would you feed those to your kids or let them drink out of the water around one of these operations? Would you let them, your own children, drink out of those waters?
Yeah, I believe I would, because there has. I mean, I haven't seen enough evidence that
Even given the fact
how
that
would
Fort
you address
Chipewyan has a 30% increase in cancer compared to the regular population in Alberta, according to Alberta Health, even with that 30% more likelihood that your kids would get cancer, this is Alberta Health's own data.
But you're equating the rate. You equate.
Go ahead,
but
Dinara.
You're equating the rate of increase in cancer to the activity taking place in the oil sands. Correlation does not cause causation. It hasn't been
and downstream,
100%
define
proven.
Downstream. Do you live in Calgary or do you live in Fort McMurray or Fort Chipewyan?
No, I live in Calgary.
Oh, so you don't live downstream from the tar sands then, because the water flows north, not south, from the tar sands. Am I correct?
Yeah, well, our water supply comes from the Bow and Elbow rivers, so not from the Athabasca River.
No ability to claim yourself as a downstream person, and you absolutely don't face any of the same real threats that First Nations living within the development
I also
proximity.
disagree. Okay, and I also disagree with your claim stating that the food and the water is not safe for human consumption.
If I could jump in on that one too.
Yeah, go ahead, Chris.
Monitoring has been one of the things that's been identified as a real gap. So a number of people living downstream of the oil sands have expressed concerns over their health and declining health, and they're concerned about the cumulative impacts as more and more of these projects are developed. And then when they raised those concerns with the Alberta government and the federal government, the response that they got back was, well, you know what, we don't actually have enough monitoring information to be able to say one way or the other. And they've embarked on a large multi-year program to develop monitoring. And that, for many people, that's coming far too late in the process.
Absolutely.
Doesn't answer the questions that people have today, and frankly is slow to be introduced. And that's just one example of what when the international community looks at the development of the oil sands, they say, that's just one example of where it seems quite clear that the Alberta government and the federal government have not been keeping pace with the actual scale of this development and the potential threat that it places on that local area.
I want to ask this a very quick question, because I know Malika wants to get in with the community, but I really wanted to know how much oil reserves are in the tar sands, because that really gives us a sense of how much money is just sitting there, potentially. Dinara, do you want to take that? Just quickly.
Sure. Well, in the 2013 year, just if we take just 1 year, you'll be seeing over $20 billion invested into already multi-billion-dollar industry, which, and I don't want to, repeat other comments, but it does create thousands of jobs.
Okay, I understand that, and I've got one more quick follow-up. I've got a quick follow-up because we have done this quite extensively. But a quick follow-up: how many generations will this oil reserve last for?
Over 100 years, with the current remaining established reserves sitting at 169 billion barrels, and these are reserves that are recoverable with current oil prices and current technology. What the initial resource is 100 times larger. However, we don't have the technology to develop it yet.
So basically, a lot of money is at stake here. There's a lot of money involved. Okay.
Trillions.
Yeah, trillions of dollars. Okay, I just want the audience to know this, because this is a topic that all three of you talk about extensively, but the rest of us, it's really helpful for us to understand it. Malika.
Well, Femi, I wanted to end here with a slight. I wanted to end here with a bittersweet silver lining, if you will. Clayton, there's a Facebook comment from Becky who says, one benefit could be that the oil sands have brought the native people of this country closer together and a reason to unify, not only here in Canada but around the world. The message of constant oppression is getting through to the masses, and I'm finding allies where none existed before. Would you agree?
Absolutely. We have seen the explosion of one of the most incredible popular social movements known as Idle No More, led by Canada's First Nations peoples, most notably Canada's First Nations women, that have been taking on fundamentally core issues that we face, like the tar sands and the associated state repression that this development represents, particularly to Indigenous communities who have been rising up, concerned about health and the violation of their fundamental fundamental human rights and treaty rights. And so absolutely there is, it has become somewhat of a lightning rod for the emergence of popular social movement organizing in this country, and has become one of the main unifying factors between the student movement, the labor movement, the indigenous rights movement, and of course the environmental movement, coming together into one very powerful social movement that the Canadian government is very concerned about. As a matter of fact, our own security apparatuses, the Canadian security agencies, have been monitoring Idle No More because of their activities in the tar sands and across the country, trying to raise awareness about these issues.
This is always really typical on the stream, is that we get great guests and the conversation just begins to take off and then we wrap up the show. That's exactly what I'm about to do. Dinara, Chris, Clayton, thank you very much for sharing your expertise on the stream. We really appreciate it.
Thank you for having us.
You're very, very welcome. So, on Thursday, would you pay somebody to have your baby? Commercial surrogacy is a booming business in countries like India and Thailand, but some call it exploitation. We look at the controversy surrounding this type of surrogacy. That's in the next AJ stream, but you know where we will be in the meantime, always online at stream.aljazeera.com. Thanks for watching.